Well, there you have it. The Greens have crumbled like cookies and have waved through Labor's centrepiece Housing Australia Future Fund bill, but not before managing to squeeze an additional $1 billion out of the government. That additional $1 billion will be allocated to the National Housing Infrastructure Facility. Add to that the $2 billion that they managed to wring out of Albo earlier this year, and that's $3 billion in upfront funding for social and affordable housing. $3 billion might not sound like much, and let's be real, given the scale of the problem, it's not. But it's still $500 million more than what the Housing Australia Future Fund is designed to drip feed over the course of 5 years. So 6 months of sustained pressure forced the government to find more upfront funding than the HAFF will disperse over 5 years. The Greens are entitled to chalk this one up as a win, but in the grand scheme of things it's a fairly minor one. The HAFF is still a very poor policy that will do next to nothing when it comes to shifting the dial on the social housing issue. Michael West has published a good article on the topic highlighting the HAFF's failure to stack up. It's well worth a read. I am sorry though, Mr. West, I should have warned you. Any comparison between the HAFF and the Medical Research Future Fund seems to rile up the blinkered faithful. Contrary to what you may want to believe, the government have not, at the stage of pulling this video together, released the investment mandate for the HAFF. Katie Gallagher is on record as saying it won't be finalised until the legislation has passed. All we do know is that the government asked the Parliamentary Budget Office to use an investment return to match the Emergency Response Fund, which at the time was CPI plus 2 to 3%. In a previous video I'd used the MRFF as a comparison because it was far closer in scale to the Big Daddy Future Fund and was the only smaller fund that had been around long enough to weather some of the rise and fall of the stock market. Well, the 22-23 financial year is done and dusted, and the results for the Future Fund and its little baby funds are in. So how'd they fare last financial year? The cold, hard reality is that whichever baby fund you want to pick, last financial year they all returned almost identical results. 4.4, 4.5, 4.7, 4.6. What do they all have in common? That's it, they're all less than 5. So even before accounting for fees and all that sort of stuff, if the HAFF had invested its $10 billion at the start of the 22-23 financial year, by the end of the financial year the fund would have grown by between $440 million and $470 million, depending on which of the baby funds you want to use as your point of comparison. And then after you take out your $500 million disbursement, the fund is then worth between $9.94 and $9.97 billion. Then take out your fees and interest repayments, whatever. You see the problem? It doesn't stack up.
Should be obvious to everyone now.
Generally, how this investment stuff works is that chasing higher potential returns means you're taking on higher potential risk. It's going to be interesting to see how the government choose to manage this, because the reality is, given that a base of $500 million or 5% of the initial investment needs to be withdrawn from the fund annually, factoring in things like fees, the HAFF will need a 7 to 9% return each year for the fund to break even. A return of this size would require a more aggressive investment mandate than any of the existing baby funds have today, which means the HAFF would need to take on more risk, which,
trigger warning,
is why people are correct when they say that this is essentially a gamble on the stock market. In 20 years' time, the HAFF may well be a decent sized bucket of funding for the government of the day to allocate as they see fit. But unless the government of today take much larger steps in the short to medium term, the problem that Albo's
centrepiece
housing policy has been designed to address will only grow worse. Something else you really have to find funny is that now that the HAFF has been approved, the reality around when these HAFF projects will start is really starting to hit. You've now got people like the CEO of the Community Housing Industry Association coming out and saying that they're hopeful that some construction will start next year and that people would start to see activity on the ground in 2024. So really, that sounds to me like anyone that was saying the first HAFF home wouldn't be completed until 2025, those people might have been right on the money. The HAFF is a crap policy. Granted, it's slightly less crap thanks to the pressure from the Greens and the crossbench ensuring that $500 million was the minimum annual disbursement and not the cap, but it's still crap nonetheless. When the government can find more money for social housing following 6 months worth of pressure than the HAFF will deliver over 5 years,
there is something seriously wrong here.
I'll be keeping a keen eye on what and how the HAFF actually delivers, but given the ambiguity built into the bill and the refusal to define social and affordable housing, tracking the HAFF's performance may be next to impossible. And if you're renting, good luck. No doubt the Greens will continue to pressure the government on issues faced by renters, And I guess you just never know. Closer to the federal election, Labor might actually take some action, particularly if they're worried about losing a seat or two. Unfortunately, that's politics.